a record button. Mm-hmm. All right, so I wanted to get us started, and got a little echo here. I might ask you to mute until I ask a question, because sometimes I think that causes a little bit of the echo. Okay, so you see I changed the background slide. Instead of the stained glass at our church, this is the stained glass at the church in the city. It's a beautiful half rose stained glass. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a lot of information about it, about what was the inspiration for it, who designed it, anything like that. But I was able to get some information from one of the gentlemen who worked on the restoration, and he said from his records, it was the glass was created by a company called CH Postal, or I'm not sure how to pronounce it, POSTEL. I looked the company up. I don't think they're around anymore. It says what building they were located in. But anyway, I thought that was interesting, and it's certainly a beautiful stained glass piece. And of course, we have our beautiful stained glass that we have in Bluebell. And this one is developed, the stained glass here is developed by Wyatt Studios. And we do have a little bit more information on it. And the story behind it is actually described by Crosby Wyatt himself. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit more when we get to the move to Bluebell chapter. So I'm going to start us off with prayer. And if somebody will be thinking about who wants to close us in prayer today, that would be awesome. So please pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we are amazed and in awe at the wonderful works that were accomplished by those who came before us at Grace Baptist. Help us to be your faithful stewards and listen carefully for what you would have us do now. Help those among us who are sick, in the hospital, in rehab, in the hospice, and grieving. Thank you for your grace, your promises, and for this auspicious day in the life of our congregation, and most of all, for your love. Amen. Okay, and so I'm going to try to fly through a little bit of a review, and then we'll get into the chapters that we're covering for today. So we started off last week about why do we study history, and we got some good input from everyone, and these were the things we came up with. The only one I wanted to add is the one at the end, and it's because the Bible tells us so. And so I'm going to share these verses with you real quickly. It's Deuteronomy 4:9. And it says, do not forget the things your eyes have seen, and do not depart from your heart all the days of your life, but make them known to your sons and your grandsons. I'll add daughters and granddaughters. Okay, Deuteronomy 32:7. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of all generations. And 1 Corinthians 10:6. Now these things happen as examples for all of us. See, even the Bible wants us to study history. Sorry, kids. Then we covered what we wanted to get out of the Sunday school class, and this is what we came up with. We wanted to learn more about our history, be inspired, and help us plan for the future, and an easier way to share our faith, perhaps. I talked briefly about some of my inspiration and how I felt like it was God's call, and saw a lot of God sightings along the way writing this book. And I also talked with you a little bit about what the book is going to look like. It's going to be terribly thick, over 35 chapters and over 400 pages. Here are 18 of the chapters, and these are what we're trying to march through, these 150 years of these topics. I covered last week the first 5, and today we'll cover the second 5. And then we'll get the last 2 weeks will cover the last 8. And I think this is the cover I'm going to go with. They are on the right. And I mentioned to you last week how as I dove into the research for the book, I got very curious about who the people were 150 years ago and along the journey. Who were they and what were they like? And I wish I could know more about them. And so for that person, that Tamara Phillips, 150 years from now, as she or he does hopefully we'll still be here. God will provide for us, and we'll still be around. When they write our history, they'll have a little something about who we were 150 years ago, because also in this book, in between those 18 chapters are 17 chapters of the talks I had with you. So most of you on the call today, I think I've spoke with as many people as I could who were willing to speak with me, as well as some past members. And so those stories, your stories, are included in the book as well. And the next chapter is got to have a takeaway and what you hope you you hope people will remember after they read your book, and I hope that they will hear that God is calling for us. He has a will and a vision for our life, and if we listen and we follow it individually and as a congregation, great things can happen. And I talked a little bit about the beginnings of the church, how we were a mission for 10th Baptist, and how we were started in 1870. Our first service was, and then we had Sunday school classes starting the next week. We were in a rented hall until we had our first building, which was a tent. And when we were founded 150 years ago yesterday, we were in this tent, or this is a picture of that tent. And it was not just any old tent. It had a wood floor and was heated. So we did okay until we outgrew it. And then we built this building at 2nd and Mervine, not Marvine, but this book had, with the picture, had that as a caption. But I was asked last week, is that building still around? And it is not. It is demolished. And it was demolished in 1969 to make way for this building here on the left at Temple for Gladfelter and Anderson Halls. So if you're familiar with the Temple campus, that's where our church, first church building used to be in Philadelphia. And then, okay, this was the church quickly, that if you've heard the stories about how crowded we became and that members got tickets in order to get in, this is where that overcrowding took place. And in some of the stories you hear that Conwell founded Grace Baptist and Conwell founded Temple University. Well, I have a little bit of an issue with both of those statements, but anyway, our church was already in existence before Conwell. He was our fourth pastor, so when he came, we were just finishing this building. We were founded before Conwell. We became huge because of Conwell's magnetism and his abilities as a speaker, and certainly he had an impact on our growth and the things we were able to do after he came. Okay, but then, and this is also where we were housed when Hattie Mae came into the picture, who we're going to talk about today. And this is the great building in the city that's a landmark historical building now, that was known as Baptist Temple, that many members, especially former members and still some of our current members, have great memories about. And Conwell had a different idea for the design of it. He wanted it more of an auditorium. When he grew up going to church, he found it very unpleasant sitting on those hard wooden pews. So he wanted people to be comfortable and feel in a homey environment. And so he made it more like a stage or auditorium with padded seats and things like that. And former members sometimes call these green things on top igloos. And it was designed by an architect named Thomas P. Lonsdale from Norristown, who also designed some of the other buildings on Temple campus and in Philadelphia. And then we moved as our congregation dwindled, and we were meeting in the lower chapel, the chapel of the Four Chaplains. We finally decided to move out to Bluebell, and this is our building, and we'll talk a little bit more about its design and architect as we get to the chapter on the move to Bluebell. And from there, we talked about the pastors of Grace Baptist. I had my parade of pastors, and you guys caught me. I missed one of the pastors, and so I added him in. Eric Lewis is on the bottom row there. He was our pastor from 79 to 81. Like I said, these are 11 of our 14 pastors. I could find no pictures of our second and third pastors, Green and Kimbrell. The things I pointed out, a few little tidbits for you, is Conwell was our longest serving pastor for 42 years. He served from 1882 to his death in 1925. Second longest was Fred Lewis, and he was with us for 22 years, in his 30s to his 50s. And then the three pastors were with us for 12 years, and those were Poling and Vroom, and then our very own George Hawthorne was with us for 12 years. And our latest is David Brannicky. And from the pastors, we talked about Conwell, whose much is written about. Russell Conwell, most well known as the founder of Temple University, I wish there was an asterisk because he didn't found the university alone. He found it with the help of a congregation. So some things about Russell Conwell. He reinvented himself. He did a lot of things in his life, and this could be a whole Sunday school class in and of itself. We could have a lot of discussion about Russell Conwell. He was idolized while he was alive. I think he had a magnetism. You immediately you were his friend. He loved humans. He loved people, and he walked the street, never met a stranger. He was called in the neighborhood to come and pray with people. That didn't matter if they went to our church or not. And someone died in the neighborhood, he came and prayed with the family. He sat by the bedside of people. So he was very well known and beloved by the congregation in the neighborhood. But he was an educator, a lawyer, a world traveler. He wrote about his travels. He was a newspaper man. Like I said, best known, he was a Union captain. There he is in the lower left-hand corner. And there on the right hand, I pointed out last week, Joan Frizzell provided that photo. That's a photo of her grandparents being married by Conwell. And you see what a tall, powerfully sized man he was. And people were small at that time, if you think about it. Not as big as we are today. And here are the chapters we're going to get to today. We're going to try to get to Hattie Mae Wyatt, the story of Hattie Mae, Johnny Ring, talk about the founding of Temple, Acres of Diamonds, and then some of the other things we were doing in the city at the time, like founding hospitals and orphanages and other churches. Okay, if you've been around our church very long, you've probably heard of Hattie Mae and the 57 cents, but we're going to try to run through it anyway, because it's an important story. And it's still, sometimes if you're on Facebook or other forms of social media, this story pops up. I find it interesting. It's not usually with the original Hattie Mae portrait you see here, but it's a story that still resonates with people, because it's very much how sometimes just a little something can go a long way. And as Conwell says, Hattie Mae's story still speaks to us today. And I think that is attested to the fact that you can see it as a little inspirational story roaming around Facebook. So as the story goes, and you got to remember, Conwell was a storyteller, and he never told. I've been told by various members that they heard a different version of this story from their grandparents. And the reason is he never told the story the same way twice. So this is a story, and the one that you'll find in the book is based on a sermon he did on December 1st, 1912. And it was at this particular sermon was the unveiling of the portrait that you see there, that I believe we still have at the church. And as the story goes, we were in that building at Berks and Mervine, and it was so overcrowded. And as I said, Conwell would walk the streets, and he's walking up one Sunday morning, and all these kids are hanging out in front of the church because they can't get in. The Sunday school rooms are overcrowded. So he sees this cute little 7-year-old sitting out there, and he scoops her up, puts her on his shoulder, and he carries her in and sets her in the back of the Sunday school room so she can be in the Sunday school class. And then weeks later or sometime later, he runs into Hattie Mae on the streets, and he's telling her, he says, "Don't worry, Hattie, one day we're gonna build a bigger church so all the kids will be able to come." And as I said, Conwell was always called in the neighborhood to pray for people when they were sick or if they'd lost a family member. And sure enough, the Wyatt family calls Conwell to come over because Hattie has died. She contracted diphtheria. And she had passed away at age 7. And they had something for Conwell. They gave Conwell Hattie's 57 cents that she had saved because she had told her parents she was saving it because she wanted the church to have a bigger building so that all the children could come to Sunday school. So Conwell, being Conwell, he takes it back to the church, and he was inspired by Hattie Mae, that Hattie Mae wanted that, bigger Sunday school class. So he gives a rousing sermon to the congregation, and he has the 57 cents and he auctions them off. And the church people, the members of the congregation, gave $250 to buy a penny. That's how much that he earned from that auctioning of the 57 cents. And then he had them give the pennies back. After you had bought a penny, he asked you to give it back. And 54 cents was given back. So somebody kept their penny. A couple of people kept their penny that they paid for, but then he had some framed in the hall. But from this, he got the different organizations, and even a new organization was formed in the church called the Wyatt Mite Society. And all these different organizations in the church were motivated and inspired to start some fundraising efforts. And this was a church of not a lot of wealthy people. So this was, common working people were giving up money, but it helped. Hattie Mae's story helped inspire people. That's the real point of it, much like the story of in the Bible. And Conwell brings this up in his sermon of the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, that sometimes when we give what we can, it makes a world of difference. And so that's the story of that. Now, a point. Many of Conwell's stories are taken in as myths. And I didn't know that. I'd always been told these stories and heard them in the church and thought they were all quite factual. So when this first got brought to my attention, I was like, what? And then Joan Frizzell had provided me some information about Hattie's parents that she had looked up at some time. So I would like to clarify, if you ever hear that the story is a myth, you can find out there, if you search the records, this is a real family. Hattie and her sister, unfortunately, her younger sister died 5 days later, also of diphtheria. So the family lost the 2 daughters, but then they went on to have another daughter, and they became members of our church. And they are real people. And this story is probably true from the records we have in the church. But more than that, there were real people. So we can kind of put it together something was formed called the Wyatt Mite Society, et cetera. The events that followed thereafter make it the veracity probably quite true. And the family is buried in Longview Cemetery in Jenkintown. So we know this family existed and became members of our church. And if you look it up on Snopes, they'll say it's a myth. Well, I say Snopes has got it wrong. The only thing that I found possibly slightly maybe exaggerated was somewhere along the way, Conwell said the 57 cents was used as the down payment for our new building, when actually our church records show it was $1,000. But I think that's just a minor detail.
Hey, Tamara?
Yes.
Just to add to the Hattie Mae story, because we have a hospitality network, and sometimes especially when we have older kids, the mothers complain that the kids roam around the church a little too much. So we tell the kids the story of the Hattie Mae and the 57 cents, and then we add a little thing to it. We say, sometimes people say they can still see Hattie Mae walking around and hear her jingling her coins. And when that happens, the kids never roam around the church again. Hattie Mae is still a part of Grace Baptist.
I think I need to add that. I think that's wonderful.
Just so you know.
I think that's a detail that needs to be added in. I still have time. I think I might have to go in and put that in there. I love that. Okay. So next is Johnny Ring and the Sword. I can't quite say the same thing about this story. There's not as many facts that are backing up this one, but let's go through it anyway, and I'll tell you what I know. So first of all, to start the story off, you got to understand Conwell's background. In the times, we didn't have, in this point in history, people weren't going to the movie or having television. So a form of entertainment was people would go and hear lectures. So you would go, you take your family sometimes, people would go to these lecture halls called lyceums, and you would hear speakers. So there was a whole speaker circuit in the country. And you would hear speakers, and they would give entertaining speeches. They would give motivational speeches. They would self-improvement, different topics. But Conwell was a headliner on something called the Chautauqua Circuit. And Mark Twain also was part of the Chautauqua Circuit. But so he told, this is one of the stories, and this wasn't, but like a decade after the Civil War. So war stories were popular, and he was part of something called the Grand Army of the Republic, which is like a social group for former Union members, that he would tell these kind of stories. So storytelling was an art form, and Conwell was an expert at it. But just setting the stage for it. And this is from the details you get on Johnny Q. The story, as Conwell told it, are from a sermon he gave on February 20th, 1921. These are what you'll see in the book. And so a little bit of background information so you understand the story. I think I said told you about when I was talking about Conwell, that when he became a Union soldier, he was so popular. He was only 19 when he enlisted, but he was so popular among the men because he was already well known, because he ran around the area giving recruitment speeches. And so all the men knew him, and they were excited to have Conwell as their captain. And so they had given him this honorary sword, ornamental. It was more of an ornamental sword. And they had inscribed on it, "True friendship is eternal." So this was a very prized possession of Conwell's. And some other background information you need to know is that even though Conwell grew up in a very devout family, a farm family, he had become an atheist. When he went away to a private school, Wilbraham Academy, and then Yale, a combination of getting all educated and also a combination of getting disillusioned, because he was a poor farm boy and he's seeing all these wealthy people and they don't seem very religious, yet they get to do everything. They get to wear fancy clothes and go to the different clubs that he can't because he doesn't have the money to join them, and he doesn't have the nice clothes. And he got disillusioned about what's the point. And it's for somehow he decided God doesn't exist, and he would actually sign his name in college at Yale, Russell Conwell, atheist. So that is a little background on the story. So as the story goes, as Conwell told it, when he was a captain, this boy named Johnny Ring comes up from Boston, and Johnny Ring is small and young, and he wants to be in the Union Army. And Conwell says, "Nope, you're too young, you're too small, you can't join." And he comes back this time with his dad, and his dad says, "No, Johnny's going to join one way or the other. I want him to go with you because I know you'll take care of him." And so Conwell asked him, "Johnny, are you willing to have your hair frozen to the ground? Are you willing to have your limbs shot off? Are you willing to lose your life? Are you going to be able to take care of me? Will you be willing to be my aide and do whatever I want you to do and polish my sword and polish my boots?" Johnny says yes to everything. He wants to be in the Army. So off he goes with Conwell, and they're sitting around in Conwell's tent one night. And here Johnny opens his Bible and he starts to read it. Conwell does not approve. And so he tells Johnny, "You can't do that in here. My men know I'm an atheist. They're going to laugh at me and ridicule me. So get out of here with the Bible." So Johnny puts the Bible away. Well, weeks later, or next time, Johnny pulls out his Bible. Well, Conwell loses it this time and says, "I'm your officer. You must obey me. Don't read the Bible in here." So that's the beginning of, but he does admire Johnny. There's a relationship there. Johnny's in tears as he leaves the tent and says, "I love you, Captain, but you're terrible. You're an evil man for not letting me read the Bible." But as the story goes, Conwell's men had not gotten their paychecks in some time. And so he contacts some officers in the next town, and if Conwell will come there, they will give him the paychecks because his men are getting disgruntled and nothing's going on in the camp anyway. And so he leaves without the proper permissions. He leaves his men and he goes to the neighboring town where he can pick up the checks for his men. While he's gone, Pickett and the Confederates, General Pickett, storm Conwell's encampment there. And, there's fire, everybody's being shot at, and there's a big bridge, and Conwell's men are leaving across the bridge. And as they go, they're setting it afire so that the rebels won't chase after them. And meanwhile, as Johnny crosses the bridge, he goes, did Conwell take his sword with him? And the guy says, "Well, I think he did." And Johnny says, "No, I think it's still in the tent." So he runs back across the bridge, the burning bridge with people firing and everything. He grabs the sword and he runs back across the bridge amidst all the flames and all the bullets firing. And meanwhile, one of the Confederate leaders says, "Tell the boy just to jump. We won't shoot at him." But he can't hear. Johnny can't hear amidst the noise of the fire. And he gets across the bridge, but he's so badly burnt and throws the sword down, rolls down the hill of the embankment. But like I said, he's badly burned. He's taken to Hammond Hospital nearby. He ends up dying of his burns. And so Conwell is very upset, and he feels so badly about not letting poor Johnny read his Bible. And as the story goes, later on in another war scenario, Conwell does become a Christian, And he just never forgot Johnny Ring, his devoutness. And he would later be asked in life, why do you work so hard? Why do you do all this? And his answer was always, because I have to do the work of two men. I live for myself and for Johnny Ring. So that's the story as Conwell told it, that many people have been inspired by, and that here's a picture of a statue that is on Temple's campus today. And Temple actually in the 20s made a movie based on this story. It supposedly got destroyed in a fire, but there's no copy of it that can be found. So some facts, unfortunately, as I researched this one, Johnny was not from Boston. He was from the same town as Conwell. They went to the same school. They were the same age. He was not Conwell's assistant. He was a clerk. He was promoted to corporal before he died, and he did not die of burns. He died of phthisis, which is another word for tuberculosis. So he did die at Hammond Hospital, but he died of tuberculosis. And Conwell got into a lot of trouble for leaving his men without the proper authorization. And so he was court-martialed in May 1864. And that's the story of Johnny Q. Ring. So, a better story. So that one is largely myth, but it is a good story. And like I said, Conwell was a storyteller. So I think I covered all the points on that one. Temple University. This is the one I think deserves a little time to talk about. And I think most everybody on the call here has probably heard how it got started, but I'm going to go over it briefly anyway. In 1884, and we were still in that building at Berks and Mervine, one of our members, Charles M. Davies, he was a printer, and he came to Conwell, and he was so inspired by Conwell, he himself wanted to be a minister also. And would Conwell teach him at night? And Conwell said, if you're willing. Conwell loved education. He had done a lot for himself to improve himself. He would carry a book. I think I told you this last week too. He liked to carry a book in his pocket. So at any time, if he was not doing something, he could pull out his book and still be learning something. So he was a big proponent of education and believed in people having the ability to improve themselves. So you also, a big point we've got to think about is the times. So at this time, the only people that got to go to college basically were wealthy people. Because if your family was, regular people, if you were a farmer, a regular tradesman, you didn't have the money to allow your children once they got old enough, needed to work to pay for themselves and to help pay for the family. So the common man, the regular working people weren't able to get a college education. It's an easy steps as there are today to go from nothing to something. And so this was another reason Conwell, I think, was motivated to help provide education. So I don't think it was only the story of Charles Davies, because also looking at his life, he talked about in the area where the church was, he walked the streets a lot. Remember, the people would call on him. And he saw a lot of poverty. He saw a lot of people walking around hungry. He would carry a basket with him when he visited various families. And so he had food and things to give out to people. Sometimes his basket would be empty. And he tells the story of, running into a woman, and she's hopeful when she sees him with his basket. And then he shakes his head because it's empty, and, her fallen look because she's hungry. And he sees, two poor little boys sleeping in the corner of the shadows of a building. And it disturbs him that we have these great structures, but we don't have enough to take care of the people who need help. So he really believed, as we do, I think, at Grace Baptist still today, that we need to be God's hands and feet and try to solve some of these problems, not just be a church of theory, but a church of practice. So he really believed in that. So when he offered to teach Charles Davies, there was more than, I think, just one person coming up and asking to be taught. But when he did actually teach the class, not only did Charles show up, but he brought 5 friends. So 6 of them showed up. And then the second time the class was offered, there were 40 of them. So Conwell definitely got the idea that there was a need for this, and that these were people who had no option, no ability to go to college during the day because they were working. They were printers, building carpenters, and they were working people. And so their only option, all these classes were at night. And so that's how Temple got the owl is their emblem, the night owls. So we began as a night school. There weren't very many. I don't think we were the very first university that was a night school, but we were among the first that were offered mainly to working people. That idea was not met with a lot of enthusiasm, by the way, in the city. It was not met by enthusiasm with other ministers. They thought Conwell and the church had no business being in the education business, or it was beyond the scope of what they felt churches were about. So he was not met with enthusiasm from that. He was not met with enthusiasm from wealthy people, because you were going to have people that were going to be trying to be above their station in life. You're going to have people taking jobs from their children. And so it was not a popular concept. We didn't get a lot of wealthy. Temple University didn't get a lot of big endowments from wealthy people. Let's be sure to point that out. So guess how the church that really kept this university afloat, it never would have survived the first probably 10 years had it not been for the church. The church financed Temple University and kept it alive. And this is, regular people that were workers sacrificing, self-sacrificial giving to keep this university afloat. And Conwell was a heck of a motivational speaker, I think, to keep the church so involved. But the church members were the teachers of these classes too. He had lined people up from the church. Laura Carnell will be someone, again, thanks to Joan Frizzell, that I learned about, that was Conwell's right-hand person and helped start a lot of the schools at Temple. So, and at this time, it was not just that we had started Temple. We didn't have just one focus. This Temple University and these classes got started before we built the big building. So we've got, at the same time, we've started a university that's struggling financially. We've got the building with the mortgage. Hey, by the way, we decided to start a couple hospitals and an orphanage around the same time. So we got a lot going on, but we managed to do it because we kept giving and we kept doing, and these things happened. I really appreciated an article. I think it was in a newspaper called the Public Ledger. I hope I'm not getting that wrong. But it was in 1899, this article was about how a whole congregation preached a sermon. And what it was about, it said that the church used to give these fairs. It made me think of the thing we used to have in November when we have the vendors come in. That goes back a long time in our history. We've been having fairs at the church from the very beginning. I can picture people maybe having things they've knitted, and maybe there was some wooden objects people have made that they're selling, baked goods, who knows what all they were selling at the fair. But they also use these fairs as a membership. They would tell their neighbors about these fairs, and their neighbors would come and see what fun we were having. They'd end up joining the church. It was almost like a membership thing too, the church was using these fairs as. But a lot of the money from these fairs at this time was going to Temple University, to keep it alive, to keep these students being able to go to class. So what this sermon was about is, evidently the church had held this fair on Christmas Eve. So here we are on Christmas Eve holding this huge fair to help pay for Temple University. Come Christmas morning, guess what the sermon was about? Evidently, some treasurer, somebody that we owed a note to, had give us a buzz. Oh, by the way, you thought that note, that $1,000 was due in 2 weeks. Well, we want it now. So they called a note due, and they were, really putting the university in jeopardy. So on Christmas morning, Conwell asks everyone, I know all of you were at the fair last night. I've got to ask you, we've got to pay for this money. So instead of a sermon, everybody was called upon to stand up and individually tell how much they're going to give.
Oh,
yes. And so, but the writer of the article, he thought it was a congregation preaching a sermon, because it meant that much to us that these people who really, and he puts it in blunt terms in the article, they're giving up probably what they're giving their family for Christmas. They're giving that up to help this university stay afloat. So this whole congregation preached a sermon through their actions. I thought that was powerful and meaningful. And the last thing I want to point out about Temple University is the words that Conwell spoke at the cornerstone when the building was built. I'm not going to read you his whole sermon, but his hopes that this building and this university will go on testifying after we shall have all gone to our long rest that the Church of Jesus Christ is not only an institution of theory, but an institution of practice. Well, I don't think that many people are going to associate Temple University with a Christian university and think of it as a place of Jesus Christ. But I think if you ask people who've had much contact with Grace Baptist, they will say that we are an institution of practice. So that goes on. And I don't think it hurts us to mention to people, if they ever bring up Temple University, the story that connects us with that university, that our forebears, the people who went before us at Grace Baptist, really did found that church, not just Conwell. Okay, and today Temple University is a very well thought of university. There are over 37,000 students. In October 2021, the U.S. News and World Report claimed that Temple University is one of 6 area affiliate universities that are the best global universities out there. Okay, and that's Temple University. What I'm going to say about that? Well, closely associated with Temple University is the story of Acres of Diamonds. How are we doing on time? You know what? I want to take a quick break and let's go to the video, because I did promise you in this class each week we're going to take some time and look at the video that most of you were involved with helping put together. So bear with me. I hope, and you're going to have to let me know if you can see can you see the video?
Tamara, real quickly, just if you
Yes.
are not muted, try to mute everyone to be muted so that we're not getting any background noise on the Zoom call.
Great idea.
Thank you.
We had this redone.
Yes. Okay. So can you see the video?
No.
Oh,
You can't see it?
Yeah,
You see the
Yes, we see it.
presentation?
Yes, we see your presentation.
You see the presentation, not the video?
Well, we do see the video too.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to start it now and make it large, okay?
okay. Good.
I am Jennifer Neves. In 1922, Grace Baptist bought a piece of land in Collegeville, Pennsylvania, and members built rustic cabins and recreation buildings, and Temple Camp began.
I am Brandon Montgomery, and this is a camp photo from the boys' camp in the 1950s. Temple Camp likely was a follow-on to the earlier Temple Brigade, which was a boys' militia group that did drills and performed at various events in Philadelphia. They practiced at encampments.
Well, that's you.
I am Kathleen Weil, and members and former members who attended the camp have detailed memories of their time spent as campers and counselors.
I am Butch Swanson. Campers earned badges for canoeing, archery, made crafts, and swam in the dirty Perkiomen Creek. The camp was sold and today operates as Camp Grand Israel.
The pulpit at Grace Baptist, then known as Baptist Temple, saw many great speakers behind it. Temple University programs and graduations were often held in the auditorium of our church. Pictured here are Helen Keller and her teacher Ann Sullivan when Temple University gave them honorary degrees on February 16, 1931.
I'm Patrick Rogers. Grace Baptist Church, with Daniel Poling as its pastor, made plans to create a memorial to Russell Conwell. As architects drew up plans, tragedy struck very close to home. Poling's own son, Clark V. Poling, and the other chaplains died in the sinking of the Dorchester. The church agreed that it would build a chapel to honor the 4 men of different faiths who stood together in brotherhood to serve their fellow men.
I'm Jean Strenny. On February 3rd, 1943, the US-AT Dorchester was en route to Greenland with 902 men, some civilians, some Navy, some merchant marines. It was a frigid night and the seas were rough. None knew that before dawn, nearly 3/4 of them would be gone. Germans had gotten word of the convoy. When the ship was struck by the German torpedoes at 12:55 a.m., the explosion ripped a hole in the ship, and it was doomed. The four chaplains each gave up their own life jackets to men without them.
I'm Dave Shaw, and this is World War II chaplain George L. Fox. He was a Methodist minister and the oldest of the four chaplains. He grew up in Altoona, Pennsylvania, in a Catholic family and served in World War I as a medic.
I am Kathy Grable. This is Rabbi Alexander D. Good. He was a native of Washington, D.C., and followed in his father's footsteps in 1937 and became a rabbi. In 1925, he married his childhood sweetheart, Teresa Flax, the daughter of a rabbi, and the niece of singer Al Jolson.
I am Deborah Sharp, and this is Clark V. Poling, the son of a well-known radio evangelist and religious newspaper editor Daniel A. Poling. Daniel Poling became Grace Baptist's seventh pastor. Clark met and married Betty Young at Baptist Temple, where his father preached. He became a chaplain on June 10, 1942.
Hi, this is Joanne Flower, and this is Father John P. Washington. He was born in Newark, New Jersey, the eldest of 7 children. He almost lost his eyesight to a BB gun incident, and the Navy initially turned him down because of his eyes. When he applied a second time, this time to the Army, he covered his bad eye both times in order to pass the eye test. He'd hoped God would forgive his subterfuge.
I'm Ken Green, and this is President Harry S. Truman at the dedication of the Chapel of the Four Chaplains. He spoke February 3rd, 1951 at 3:10 p.m. and said, "As men die heroically as brothers, so should they live together in faith and goodwill."
I am Joe Gallagher. The architect of the Four Chaplains was meant to echo the traditional use of foundation space in ancient churches where chapels or crypts were built.
I am Marie Donnelly. The Chapel of the Four Chaplains, when it was located in the church, included a beautiful revolving altar representing the three faiths of the men: Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish.
I am Cliff Dobrevalik.
And I am Monet Dobrevalik. Temple University bought the Baptist Temple building when the congregation dwindled, and the church made plans to move to the suburbs.
Years went by with little investment in the deteriorating property. The Chapel of the Four Chaplains moved and today resides at the Naval Yard of Philadelphia.
I am Kim Burke, and this is my mom, Barbara Green, dressed as a bridesmaid for a Tom Thumb wedding. The church used to have a children's pageant known as a Tom Thumb wedding, where all the children would dress like members of a wedding party. In the lower floor dining hall, the children would climb atop wobbly tables and process to the stage to perform the mock wedding.
I'm Karen Good. Many famous people spoke behind the Baptist Temple pulpit in Philadelphia, including Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on August 4th, 1965. From that original pulpit that stands in the entryway of our church in Bluebell, he said, "We must recognize the need for developing a massive action program to get rid of the barriers which make it impossible for us to rise to our full maturity as citizens. We aren't going to solve the civil rights movement with prayer alone."
Hi, I'm Bob Allman, and this is Linda and my wedding photo from November 3rd, 1973 at Baptist Temple in Philadelphia. The Allman family had a lot of extended family at the church, including the Tuppence family and the Dungy family. My father and his brothers moved here from Virginia after World War II. We are Native American from the Mattaponi tribe. My father, along with his siblings, his father, and his grandfather were born on Mattaponi Reservation.
I am Janet Brannicky, and this is a program from the 100th anniversary celebration in 1972. The church moved out to Bluebell in 1975.
I am Nancy Burns, and this is an original pamphlet about the new church building in Bluebell. As years passed by, days of civil unrest increased in Philadelphia, and many members left for the suburbs, similar to other large U.S. cities.
I am Jean Hanna. In 1981, after the church building had been sold to Temple University and had decayed badly, a reporter wrote that palm-sized marble wall tiles with handwritten names of respected congregation members remain intact.
I am Marjorie Scharf. In 1974, 2 years after Grace Baptist sold the Baptist Temple building to the university, it was deemed unsafe for everyday use. In 1986, the university announced plans to tear it down, which sent preservationists into an uproar.
I think we'll stop there and pick up at that point next week. Acres of Diamond, for time purposes, I want to give us a little bit of a break and try to close around 10:30, so we have a few minutes break between the worship service. I'm going to fly through Acres of Diamonds because I think Pastor David is going to spend some time in the children's chat on this story already. So a couple little points I'll bring up. First, I wanted to share with you, we did receive a lot of commemorative letters for our 150th anniversary. And just a quote from Temple University's president. Now, this is the last president, not the most. They have named a new president, their first African-American president since then, but this was their last president. Richard M. Englert sent us a letter. And in it, he said, "We share in the excitement of this occasion. Our histories are intertwined. We are continuing to carry Russell Conwell's vision forward into a new era." I thought that was nice. It was nice to get those. So the Acres of Diamond speech, a few little tidbits you may or may not know. It was given many times even before Conwell came to Grace Baptist. So he had told this story on his travels with the Chautauqua Circuit, and it was a popular one that he gave. He became most well known for it, though, after he came to our church and was also a minister. So I think it was even more powerful when he had that attached to his name. Again, I'm going to leave the gist of the story. If you don't already know it, I'm going to leave that for Pastor David to tell you when he does the children's chat. But I think that Conwell did get some criticism for the story because it became a motivation for people to get wealthy. And so it was criticized as one of the first wealth creation sermon topics. And I'm not sure that Conwell meant it that way. I think it meant he came from a generation of self-improvement, how the individual or church can improve themselves by just trying to serve their fellow man and trying to look for a need and fill that need. And so, and in fact, he does a lot of discussion with the young man, and I've got that included in the book, where the young man criticizes it and saying, you can look in the Bible and it says that money is evil, and you're telling people to go out and be successful and make money. And Conwell says that money is not evil. Money is how we have churches, and it takes money to pay the lights or pay the bills for a church. So money is not evil. It's the love of money. And he goes on about that, and it's interesting. So I wanted you to know also that he wanted, let the happiness of others be your main ambition. I'm going to, like I said, leave most of that to Pastor David. And I think he'll point out that he gave this speech over 6,000 times all over the United States and all over the globe. He gave it at the Taj Mahal in Hong Kong. His largest audience was at Madison Square Garden with over 15,000 people in attendance, and almost as big a number out in Utah at the Mormon Tabernacle. Interestingly, in 1985, one of Temple's largest endowments was given by an Esther Griswold. She was a 1927 graduate of Temple, and she was inspired by Conwell and his giving this speech and giving all the money towards it to Temple University and to students to get their education. So I thought that was interesting. So I'll leave most of that story to be told later today. So I wanted to get to you before we have our prayer and close off and talk about what we're going to talk about next week. I wanted to be sure you knew about the other things, the big things that were going on in addition to building the big building. All of this was happening at the same time, and paying the mortgage on that big building and starting Temple University and expanding from the church on Berkson Mervine into the next building next to us and in the basement of the new building. My dog is punching things on my screen, sorry. So the other things that started happening is he saw other needs in the city. So some firemen had come to Conwell and asked them to officiate for one of their fallen brothers who had died in the line of duty. And they were telling Conwell the sad story about he was leaving 3 children without any parents. And Conwell got the idea that an orphanage needed to be started. And he had remembered that one of the shut-ins of the church was a good writer, and how she had offered to write people and request donations. So he enlisted her help to get funds given to start this orphanage. And it was called the Philadelphia Orphanage. Then it became Baptist Services of Philadelphia. And then today it still lives on in some form as an organization called Child Promise that does services for children in foster care. We also started 4 different churches, one in 1891 called Tioga Baptist, and one in 1901 called Logan Baptist. Later on, polling urged us to start new churches, and we started Conwell Memorial of Mayfair in 1941, and also Conwell Memorial of West Oak Lane. In addition to that, and you see the 2 pictures in the lower right-hand corner of Samaritan Hospital, of course, named after the story in the Bible of the Good Samaritan, and how that got started. And you also got to think of the times. There was not like we have here. There wasn't Suburban and Einstein and Lansdale Hospital and Abington not too far away with easy access to get to them through our cars. None of that existed. People got around with horse and cart if they had access to that. And these hospitals for most people were hard to get to if you could afford them. So in this particular case, somebody had come to Conwell because this young woman had an infectious mouth disease. And you got to think, that doesn't sound that bad. Well, those kind of things killed people at that time. So he enlisted some members in the church who were studying to be a nurse, and he started Samaritan Hospital. And that was another thing that members of the church stepped up and kept running and organized and ran the business of. And likewise, we started the building on the left here is Garrettson Hospital, and that was started in an industrial section of Philadelphia in the same area where Baldwin Locomotive Works was located, and there was a lot of other industries there. And it was all of that was very near Philadelphia Dental College. Well, what was happening is in the Baldwin Locomotive and these other industries, people would have injuries. They would get their hand caught in a machine, or somebody would fall off of something and they would get injuries. And because the nearest hospital was so far away, they would run over to the dental college because people there knew at least first aid, right? But this became a problem for the dental school. And so it became apparent that a hospital was needed in this area, and we started Garrettson Hospitals. So both of these hospitals, and then there was another one that was, I think, consumed by a Samaritan or Garrettson, I can't remember, but it was called Great Heart. It was a maternity hospital. That was also part of the 3 hospitals that we started, and those all became part of the Temple University health system. I would like to share with you what the president of Michael A. Young said in his commemorative letter to the church. He said, "What a difference you have made in the lives of many thousands, if not millions, of people and in the soul of Philadelphia." I thought that was nice. That was what we were going to get through today. So next week, we will do the same thing. We'll run through a quick review, and then we'll talk about the Chapel of the Four Chaplains, Temple Camp a little bit more, And the Women of Grace, there's a picture of Laura Carnell, and music, because all of those things have been important in the life and history of our church. Is there someone that would like to close us in prayer today?
I volunteer.
Thank you, Don.
You are welcome. Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, this is the day that you have made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Father, this day and at this moment, we enter into the beauty of worship. We thank you for Tamara and her efforts to remind us of who we are, both in history and in service to you. We thank you in this moment of preparation for worship. We thank you in joining our hearts and minds to receive your words and instructions. Continue to allow your presence into our individual and corporate lives. Teach us your love each day and in every way. In the name of your Son, amen.
Amen.
Amen. And if anybody has to go right ahead. But if you have any questions, I'll take a couple of questions.
Thank you, Tamara.
Tamara, that was great.
Yes, it was.
Thank you,
Tamara. Appreciate
it. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
That was a lot of hard work.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm sure hours. Many hours. Yes.
Thank you, Tamara. That was worth waking up super early in Arizona for.
Oh,
that's right.
Thanks, Pat. Okay, I'll try to allow a little more time next week for questions. It's just hard. There's so much to say, so much material to cover.
Tamara, this is Fred Lewis in Florida.
Oh, hi, Fred.
Hi, wonderful presentation. It's clear that you've really poured yourself, and so has the congregation in this presentation. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Okay. Well, I guess I'll see you in a few minutes on the other link.
Okay. Yeah, they must have gotten down here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tara.
Bye, Linda. You're welcome. Okay, stop. Oh.
Well done, Tamara. That was great.
Thanks. Now I got to figure out how to stop the recording.
Down at the bottom.
Tamara.
Down at the bottom. You'll
Oh,
see,
pause, stop recording. Thank you.
Stop recording. Yep.